Hello. My name is Stephen Woolfolk. I'm the Director of Programming and Marketing at the Kansas City Public Library, and I had no idea of the role the Westport Garden Club had played in the aesthetic of the city we all love. Founded as a women's club in 1950, the club has evolved into an organization that is committed to celebrating and promoting gardening, but also to community improvement. They host educational programs related to conservation, horticulture, and preservation, but perhaps most importantly, they have partnered with organizations like the Linda Hall Library and Arboretum, the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, and the Loose Park Garden Center in an effort to amplify their beautification efforts. They have done so much, in fact, in the Westport neighborhood and beyond that many of us likely see their work every day without even realizing it. If you are interested in the book tonight, I wanted to let you know it is available for sale up front, courtesy of our good friends at Bliss Books, and both authors will be signing copies when we're done. But first, here to tell you a little bit more about the club and the extraordinary women who have comprised it over the years, please welcome to the Kansas City Public Library, author Kristie Wolferman and photographer and club member Marianne Kilroy.
So thank you all for coming this evening to hear about this book, Sharing the Love of Gardening, the History of the Westport Garden Club. Thanks also to the Kansas City Public Library and to Steve Wolfert and Sophie Williams for enabling us to make this presentation tonight. I am here as the author, but I also received some help from Margaret Hall and Marianne Powell. And Marianne Kilroy did the wonderful photographs that have brought the story of the history of the Westport Garden Club to life. The University of Missouri published this book when it just was released on July 1st, so this is basically the book launch. Sharing the love of gardening is the mission of the Westport Garden Club, a mission that's been fulfilling for 75 years. This evening, we'd like to share some of that story with you. Not all of it, because the book is 237 pages long with over 200 images, and besides, it weighs 4 pounds. It's a big book. So, Marianne, do you want to start?
Sure. I found this quote that I thought was perfect for the book and for tonight. It's called, "Life begins the day you start a garden." It's an old Chinese proverb. And if you look at the history of any club or organization, it's illuminated by particular choices and actions of individual people. And Kansas City is no exception. We've had we have benefited from many enterprising individuals and have dreamed big and made a difference in our town. For example, many of you know, maybe, the Kaufman Gardens. That's not quite the Kaufman Garden.
That's
okay. Well, anyway, we have many individuals, entrepreneurs in Kansas City, and it's other example, people like Octave Chanute, who started the Hannibal Bridge, which started our city. There's people like Kersey Coates, the early developer in downtown Kansas City, Mary Atkins of the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, and even Lamar Hunt, who had the drive and the ambition, and we now have the Kansas City Chiefs and the iconic Arrowhead Stadium. With our ingrained Midwestern heritage, it's no surprise when a few dedicated and determined women dreamed of organizing a garden club. They wanted more than just what the perceived old-fashioned look of a woman with white gloves sipping tea and asking, how do we prune our rose bushes? They did not want a club like that. They wanted something more, because after all, at that time, in the 50s, there were 42 other garden clubs and societies in Kansas City. So the founders of the Westport Garden Club wanted to create a club that would have an impact on our community. Their club would be different. The founding women were determined and dedicated lot, crazy enough to take an idea and pursue it in order to make a difference not only in our city, our community, and even in our country. In order to obtain those lofty goals, this club would need to affiliate with the prestigious and influential Garden Club of America. That was a tall order. To gain membership in this institution or elite club would require dedication and action over 5 years.
Okay, this is the Garden Club of America logo. The Garden Club of America started in 1913. And always its intention was to represent in this logo education with the lamp of enlightenment and oak leaves to symbolize horticulture. The Garden Club of America, GCA, is a nonprofit national organization which today is composed of 200 member clubs and over 18,000 club members who devote their energy and expertise to projects in their communities and in the country. For over a century, the GCA has been a leader in horticulture, conservation, creative expression, historic preservation, and environmental protection. While researching, documenting, and providing images for this book, Marianne and I were overwhelmed by the importance and the impact the Garden Club of America has had on the country. For example, Garden Club of America set the standards for formal gardens like the Kaufman Gardens in Kansas City. Marianne and I also realized that as a member club, the Westport Garden Club has benefited from the association with the national organization, allowing our club to have a greater impact than it would have otherwise. The Westport Garden Club is focused on education and conservation and horticulture, but also advocacy for native plants. The club's been involved in many worthwhile programs and projects and has been partners with several organizations in order to achieve its goals, including the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, Linda Hall Library, Powell Gardens, and Kansas City Community Gardens. The club also has had a partnership with Jerry Smith Park through Partners for Plants, and the club founded Deep Roots, formerly the Westport Garden Club Native Plant Initiative. The Westport Garden Club's journey began 75 years ago with this woman, Helen Hayes Thompson. Now, you have to realize as we were doing this research, we were shocked to learn that we didn't know anybody's first name from reading the Independent or the Kansas City Star, because every woman in these publications was called Mrs. So-and-so. So we had to look up to find out what Helen Hayes Thompson's real name was, besides Mrs. Mason. On a hot day in July 1950, a day probably much like today, Mrs. Thompson invited 3 friends to come over to have a casual lunch on her screened-in porch in order to pose the idea of starting a garden club. Her sole focus was that this club would be different from all the other 42 clubs in Kansas City, for the goal was to become associated with the Garden Club of America. Around the lunch table that afternoon, the 4 ladies came up with a list of 50 women they thought would be dedicated to educating themselves about horticulture, conservation, and civic improvement, and who would also be willing to share their knowledge and love of gardening. Not all of these women were gardeners, but they all were civic leaders who were interested in the beautification of Kansas City. So, Marianne, why don't you explain, and here's one beautiful garden belonging to a member who's here, Carolyn Crow, and why don't you explain why it was so important, Mrs. Thompson, that we become a GCA club?
I think Mrs. Thompson was so impressed with the GCA because it was founded back in 1913. And 2 members, Mrs. Elizabeth Price Martin and Abercrombie Goodman, decided, they were in Philadelphia, and they decided to invite 11 other similar garden clubs to come to Philadelphia and discuss the idea of doing a national organization. They came from Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, Pennsylvania, for the purpose of founding a national organization with the objectives to stimulate knowledge and love of gardening among amateurs, to share the advantages of association through conference and correspondence in this country and abroad, and to aid in the protection of native plants and birds, and to encourage civic planning. Now you have to understand that these women, this is 1913, and women still didn't even have the right to vote. But these women were determined, and they were able to accomplish in those early years. They fought to reduce the highway signs on the highways and the junk and trash. They worked to protect trees, wildflowers, and birds because the highway system was endangering their native areas. Restore historic gardens, beautify their own gardens. And they wanted to urge city planning in an age of rapid industrialization. They promoted horticulture, floral design, and seed cultivation through educational publications and speakers, lectures, and flower shows. And they started a national arboretum. The National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. was not just like a one-day kind of project. This went over several years, and you know how things work in Washington, the persistence of these women, it's amazing that they were able to accomplish that. During World War I, the GCA did the Women's Land Army, which trained and encouraged young women to take place of men in the fields, asserting that a country that stands or falls by its food supplies. In World War II, they did the Victory Gardens, became involved in seed-saving campaigns, beautification of the Army camps, and then after the war, they did decoration on the war memorials. One of the, I think, a very amazing feat that they did in the 1920s, in New York, they created the GCA special train that went from New York to Seattle, where the GCA annual meeting was held, and then they went down to Pasadena, California, to help and meet with the Save the Redwoods League. Most of these women from the East Coast had never seen the redwoods, and when they got there and saw these 1,000-year-old trees being chopped down by loggers between hot dog stands and concession stands, they knew they had to do something. So in 1931, all 94 GCA clubs participated in buying 2,600 acres in Humboldt County, California, and they call it the Garden Club of America Grove, and that is where the redwoods have been preserved and saved. And you know, with California, with the floods and the fires, GCA continues to protect them and fundraise for them, and it's still part of their preservation and in the national organization. But I think, which is why she was interested in the GCA, but I don't understand how she even knew about him, since we're kind of isolated from the East and the West.
So in June 1950, I love this story, Helen Thompson and her husband went to Ridgefield, Connecticut to visit an old friend of theirs. Her name was Elizabeth Abernathy Hull, and she was from Kansas City. Miss Hull was a professed environmentalist when such a designation was unheard of at the time. She had been born in 1900 to Dr. Albert Gregory Hull, who was the Army surgeon and the chief administrator of the hospital at Fort Leavenworth. Her mother was Cora Abernathy, whose father had founded Abernathy Furniture Company, which was the first furniture company west of the Mississippi. He also was the president of First National Bank in Kansas City. Elizabeth attended Barstow School, and she spent her summers with her family on Madeline Island in Wisconsin. And this is a picture taken on Madeline Island that came from the Wisconsin Historical Society. Elizabeth Hull is on the left, and her friend Elizabeth Nesbitt is on the right. Elizabeth Nesbitt was also a Kansas Cityan, and years later, when Elizabeth Abernathy Hull suggested that we have a garden club in Kansas City, Mrs. Samuel Marty became a founding member of the Westport Garden Club. So after attending Mount Holyoke, Elizabeth Hull and her mother took up residence in Connecticut, and Miss Hull became a member of the Ridgefield Garden Club, which is a GCA club. Although she already had a reputation as a gardener, Miss Hull claimed that her affiliation with GCA was invaluable in teaching her more about gardening and flower arranging, as well as about landscaping, civic improvement, and conservation. Miss Hull was so adamant about protecting the environment that before she died, she endowed a GCA award, the Elizabeth Abernathy Hull Award, which is given annually to an individual or individuals whose work with children in horticulture and the environment inspire in them an appreciation for the beauty and fragility of the earth, an appreciation Miss Hull had and wanted to pass on. So Elizabeth Hull suggested strongly to Helen Thompson to go back to Kansas City and form a GCA club. It would be well worth her effort. It would not be easy to qualify to become a member club, for Mrs. Thompson would have to find 50 women who would dedicate themselves to working together for 5 years on their own gardens, on their own horticultural education, and on civic projects in order to make an impact. So the first thing they had to do was find a civic project. So Marianne, what was that first project?
The first project they chose was the Westport Triangle. Okay, that might make you all think about Westport Road and Broadway, but the Westport Triangle was actually at 47th and Roanoke, the old Junior League headquarters. That was the area they were going to landscape, but they were interrupted by the Great Flood of 1951. If you all, it's with the recent news, this seems almost like repetition, but the heavy rainfall began in April and went through July, and between July 9th and the 12th, 17 to 19 inches of rain fell in Kansas City. It became known as Black Friday. The levees and the temporary flood walls gave way, inundating Argentine and Armadale districts of Kansas City, swamping the water processing plants, the railroads, the bottoms, the west bottoms. 5,000 head of cattle were destroyed or died. Kansas City lost so much that even though if you remember our whole beginning of the Kansas City's history is from the Kansas and Missouri rivers and the coming together, and these are the rivers that changed our city in the beginning, but then it also changed our history in 1951. The flood's aftermath left the city with damaged houses, businesses, landscaping, and trees, which that made the Westport Garden Club ladies think, okay, this is something we can do. We can help rebuild these areas. Well, it's a little maybe more ambitious than they were capable of landscaping all of like Argentine or Armadale. So what they did go after was the trees and that were destroyed by the flooding. They pushed very hard, and if you read this article, it says, the law would require men to have licenses at the request of the Westport Garden Club. So there was the beginning of them actually having impact with the government or with using the newspaper to help get at least licensed people to help clear it. So then after they decided they couldn't do Armadale or Argentine in that area and clean it up, they went back to the Westport Triangle project, and here you see them in their pedal pushers and their skirts and their little things, working diligently, not in their gardens, but in the triangle. And they started doing landscaping at Riverside Park, St. Luke's Hospital, Linda Hall Library, where the club has been meeting ever since their inception, and who's been a partner with us for all these years. Giving unsolicited advice to city governments did not end with the 51 flood. Over the years, WGC has made suggestions to both Missouri and Kansas governments, and because of their knowledge about horticulture and conservation, even those unsolicited comments were usually heeded. In Mission Hills, they have a beautification committee, which was created in 1950, and they help maintain and enhance all the little parklets in the neighborhood. If you drive through Mission Hills, there's so many little parklets that are just, I don't know how many other cities have such a beautiful area. Presently, Laura Gibson is president, she's a member, and she is a president of the MHBC and has served on the committee for many years along with other members. So
you're saying that there were a lot of partnerships early on with city governments, and forming strong partnerships has enhanced the ability of the Westport Garden Club members to act. And besides partnering with city governments early in the club history, Westport Garden Club became associated very much so with the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, providing floral arrangements for special exhibits and Friends of Arts events. In fact, when I talked to several daughters and granddaughters of founding members, all they thought the club ever did was make floral arrangements. In fact, one granddaughter said that she remembers that the only bathtub in the house was always full of flowers, and that flower arranging took precedence over dinner. The Westport Garden Club had flower arranging experts come from England, from the East Coast, from the West Coast, to give lectures and demonstrations on various kinds of flower arranging, and some of these lectures were open to the public. So it became really kind of a main project for the Westport Garden Club. The Westport Garden Club member named Barbara Rahm became the first permanent liaison between the Westport Garden Club and the Nelson-Atkins Museum. She held a non-paid position in which she served for over 30 years, and she was so important to the museum that she even had a room that was called the Ramatorium, where she could create her flower displays. She was followed by other Westport Garden Club members, including Boots Leiter and Dee Dee Adams, who acted as liaisons between the Westport Garden Club and the Nelson-Atkins. Beyond flower arranging, in 1954, the Westport Garden Club staged its first flower show at the Nelson-Atkins Museum, followed by 8 others on a semi-annual basis. Now, these were huge events. The entire Kirkwood Hall was filled up with floral arrangements. There was always a theme. A Dutch theme one year meant that a huge windmill was built in the middle of Kirkwood Hall. They invited other garden clubs to participate in the first few flower shows, but when some people started showing up with their arrangements in milk cartons, the Westport Garden Club decided they were going to take over and make the flower shows strictly a Westport Garden Club event. And they charged entry fees to the flower shows, and the Garden Club was able to raise enough money to provide funding to create a junior gallery and a creative arts center at the Nelson-Atkins Museum. This is a picture of part of the junior gallery, which was an interactive area where children were supposed to look through peepholes to see works of art and then listen on the telephone to what was being shown to them in the pictures. And you can see at least one child is actually following the protocol. but they're all having fun, especially the guy with 2 telephones in his ears. Okay. The junior gallery was dedicated in 1960 so that, quote, youth may participate in the creative force, transforming nature into the world of art. It was open to much acclaim and was dedicated by the supervisor of the Metropolitan's Junior Museum. For this project, the Westport Garden Club won a GCA medal for outstanding civic achievement. So for many years, the museum offered these art and nature classes at the museum. And for some of the classes, children left the museum and made trips to Westport Garden Club members' homes to sketch plants and flowers and then go back to the museum to complete their projects. In this picture, Dorothy Dillon Cunningham is welcoming children into her garden so they can make their sketches before going back to complete their projects. So after 15 years of focusing attention on flower arrangements and flower shows at the Nelson-Atkins Museum, Westport Garden Club members decided it was time to branch out and devote more time to environmental and conservation projects. This was a time to become a new breed of Garden Club women. The club would not abandon the museum and in fact built the Westport Garden Room there in 1976, which it maintained for over 20 years, and held one more flower festival there in 1985. But new partnerships and new projects demanded attention, and I think Marianne's going to tell you about some of those horticultural and conservation projects.
I think when you just drive around this city, you can see the impact. At 61st and Warnell is the John Warnell House. They didn't do any renovation of the house itself, but the Westport Garden Club decided to do the landscaping. And they also needed the money to do the landscaping, so they went all out and hosted a fundraiser on the lawns, and the floral arrangements were done by the members, and all the different rooms that represented when John Warnell was married, when he had his wedding there, it was to represent that. Let's see, they also, in 1974, the WGC, led by Betty Clapp Robinson and Norman Sutherland, partnered with the GCA Horticulture and Conservation Committee to sponsor a public symposium, The Ecology of Midwest Flyways and Prairie Flora. In 1979, this is a little different project, they were visiting the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, where the members learned about the benefits of hortitherapy. They started a hortitherapy program here at the Florence Crittenden Center, and the chairman of that committee was Marie Bell Watson O'Hara, who is still a member and just celebrated her 100th birthday this July. The club also, in 1990, began a long-term partnership with Kansas City Community Gardens. They helped gardens relocate. They created it, helped it relocate to Swope Park in 2002. with the director, Ben Sharda, to open they convinced him to open the Beanstalk Garden, which is for the children. And in 2004, they started the Fall Festival. In 2000, they renovated the playground area at Children's Center for the Visually Impaired. And in 2006, they did Tulips for Troost, which was a partnership to try to beautify Troost Avenue, which is in our city is kind of known as the dividing line, and it was trying to ease that and make it a more beautiful area. Another exciting one, in 2007, they did the tree camp. Westport Garden Club had a long partnership with Luce Park. They labeled the trees in 1980, and then the Kansas City Parks and Recs designated the collection of these trees as the Stanley R. McLean Arboretum in honor of the former chief landscaper for J.C. Nichols Company. Many of the members of the Westport Garden Club have been on the board of the Luce Park Garden Center board, and member Jenny McHance was president when the KC Parks and Rec decided they wanted to start an educational program for children in Luce Park. With Joe Misseldine, they created this team tree camp for children. It had a field guide that could give the children an appreciation for what trees are in. Luce Park is full of beautiful champion trees, and the field guide tells them. Each child was also given a cute little backpack that was filled with lots of little things like magnifying glasses and what else in there that?
Well, they had a compass, they had a measuring tape to measure the circumference of the trees. And the program lasted for a couple of years. It no longer exists, but the field guides still do. There was the original field guide for young children, this one, but there also is a champion tree guide for older children to use. And some of the programs and projects that the Westport Garden Club has had are ongoing, including working at Jerry Smith Park. Westport Garden Club members have taken many field trips to prairies in both Kansas and Missouri, and they realized that these prairies were in danger of extinction. In 2009, Garden Club members visited Jerry Smith Park, the last remaining prairie in the greater Kansas City area, and they realized they could make a difference in keeping this prairie alive. Working with Kansas City Wildlands and the Missouri Department of Conservation, Westport Garden Club members became involved, contributing their time and effort at the park, collecting and sorting seeds, eradicating invasive species, and replanting native plants like this one, Blazing Star Liatris. With the help of a GCA program called Partners for Plants, the Westport Garden Club has been able to get an ongoing grant to help restore this remnant prairie. Other projects have included, in 2012, restoring a garden at a major park in Joplin, Missouri after a devastating tornado. In 2012, planting and restoring a garden at gardens at the Kansas City Museum. In 2013, propagating and planting 100 shagbark hickory trees in cooperation with Powell Gardens for the GCA's Centennial Tree Project. And in 2016, the Westport Garden Club established the Luce Park Monarch Garden. This full-sun native plant garden, partially funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, attracts pollinators, especially monarch butterflies. The garden is open to the public, and it serves as a model for simulating native planting and conservation. The QR code on the plaque there allows viewers to ID the native plants and hopefully encourage them to go home and plant these native plants in their own garden. In 2018, 2 years later, the Westport Garden Club opened two more shade gardens that also have native plants in them, and these are on either side of the garden center. And this year, in 2025, the Westport Garden Club decided to renovate an old azalea garden in Luce Park as the club's 75th anniversary project. The azaleas had originally been transplanted from the collection of Harry V. Severs in 1965, but they'd been neglected for over 50 years. The Westport Garden Club, with Carolyn Pro at the helm, called on horticultural experts Alan Brownhagen and Eric Schatz to plot the renovation of the garden, adding 130 new plants this spring. For this project, the club partners with the Kansas City Parks and Rec Department in order for them to provide irrigation, and with the Boy Scouts who helped clean up the old garden. All 4 gardens in Lewis Park, the Monarch Garden, the 2 Shade Gardens, and the Azalea Garden, continue to be maintained by the Westport Garden Club. The idea of partnership began with city governments and the Nelson-Atkins, but continued with Lewis Park and with Linda Hall Library, and we have other partners today that we carry on with.
We do, and I think we learned from the GCA and Westport Garden over the years the strength of partnerships, and as we keep expanding, the impact expands also. Like with Powell Gardens, we have been with them since their inception, cooperating and bringing they help us bring outstanding speakers, such as Doug Talami and Roy Dublick, as well as depending on the gardens to experts to provide the club with horticulture and conservation support. Deep Roots is an organization that was founded by WGC. It was inspired by a speech given by Doug Ladd, a botanist and director of the Conservation for Missouri chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Kathy Gates and Bob Berkebile started the WGC Native Plant Initiative in 2014, urging all club members to advocate for native plants and promote native plant sales. Kathy Gates, a member of the club, started the Native Plant Initiative, was too important of an idea to keep it isolated in our club only. So they went out and invited landscapers, conservation agencies, elected officials, local businesses to work together to promote native plants. WGC Native Plant Initiative morphed into a collective impact organization called Deep Roots KC. All of the there's 70 partners now that share the vision of fostering beautiful native landscapes. Deep Roots' motto is, "What you plant matters," which is short for "What you plant matters for clean water, air, for pollinators and for our food supply, for butterflies and birds, for the future of our climate, and for human, physical, and mental health."
So many of the photos in our book are of gardens that are on record at the Smithsonian Archives of American Gardens. From the beginning of the Garden Club of America in 1913, they stated that one of their purposes was to maintain, restore, and document historic gardens, and began collecting slides of historic gardens. To celebrate its 75th anniversary in 1988, the Garden Club of America decided to donate its slide collection to the Smithsonian Institution, and that collection became the nucleus for the Smithsonian Archives of American Gardens. Today, that collection includes written documentation and photographs of 6,500 historic and contemporary gardens. The Westport Garden Club successfully submitted documentation for 10 regional gardens, including the gardens of several club members, and this is one of them. This garden was called the Horn Garden when it was designed by Hare and Hare in the 1930s for Phoebe and John Horn. And then it became the Peat Garden. Margot Peat was a founding member of the Westport Garden Club. And by the 1980s, this garden had fallen into disrepair. And in 1989, Laura Lee Gibson and her husband David bought this property, and Laura Lee worked to restore it to its former glory. The very first garden that Westport Garden Club documented was this garden, which is called Gracie's Garden. It's the garden of Jan and Ned Riss, and it was named for their dog, Gracie. It was not only the first garden documented, but according to the American Archives, every single garden is labeled according to its date. So this is the 21st garden in Kansas that was documented and recorded in the American Archives of American Gardens. And the same year, Heron Haven, Norma Sutherland's garden, was submitted for documentation in the American Archives. This is Kansas Garden 22. This is Elle's garden, which is another garden that Laura Lee Gibson designed, and she's our only member who's had 2 gardens documented in the American Archives. Last year, the club completed documentation of the Beanstalk Garden at the Kansas City Community Garden, which makes our 11th garden. And this year, we're working on documentation of Margaret Hall's garden to submit to the Smithsonian. So besides documenting gardens, completing projects, supporting our partners, and taking care of our own gardens, the Westport Garden Club continues to share the love of gardening through education, action, and creative expression, which is our mission.
In the history of these, the GCA and the WGC epitomizes the quote that we put up there at the beginning that says, "Life begins the day you start a garden." By gardening, all these women have gained purpose, they've gained appreciation and a sense of accomplishments, not only in their gardens, but in their lives and in the impact of their actions that they've had on their communities. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. If anybody has questions, we would ask if you can, please use the microphones down here so that the folks watching at home can hear the question as well as the answer.
220 pages of history dialed down to a 20-minute presentation. I guess we'll go ahead.
Excuse me, you want to talk about conservation?
The acts that we do with GCA or with our club, the GCA, they have an active, committee and very active in, well, just reading the history of the advocacy they did for the National Arboretum started in 1913, 1914, and it finally opened in 1957. So it takes several years, and the different ways they do it, trying to lobby. They've used their connections with senators and people. So it's advocacy that's done in every which way that you possibly can do. But it's one of the priorities of GCA, right?
From the very beginning, though, the main way that Westport Garden Club, GCA members got their way was to write letters, repeatedly write letters. And there was a great story about how a group of Garden Club of America ladies in Georgia were very anxious to have the train stations refurbished and landscaped. And they kept writing letters and approaching their congressman and telling the congressman to talk to the railroads and get them to do something. And finally, the head of the Georgia railroads contacted GCA president and said, "If you'll just get these ladies off my back, I'll put whatever you want in."
I was wondering where you get your seeds or your cuttings from when you start these different gardens. And we have down on the west side at the Riaz Library, they have a vintage or antique seed catalog or whatever you call it down there.
I don't know. Does anyone else know? I mean, Kansas City Community Gardens provides a lot of cuttings for people in the Kansas City area, but I don't think that that's where we got our plants for the native plant gardens.
And I just wanted to congratulate you on your milestone. My name's Gina Bott, and I represent the Nature Conservancy in the Missouri field office. So I'm embedded here now in Kansas City, and I just wanted to congratulate you. Fascinating and wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say that we've been in Kansas City for 28 years in Midtown, and I didn't realize all the projects that I've been aware of that really were started by the Westport Garden Club. But I had a question for you too. You're talking about when you talk about maintaining the 4 gardens at Luce Park, can you describe what you mean by maintaining? Do you organize other people to do the work, or do you actually get your hands dirty? The garden club itself.
We have the 2 gardens, the Monarch Garden and the Azalea Garden, and there are committees, and there's a chairman and a group of women, and we literally go every week and do weeding. And we did, Carolyn could probably speak to this better, with the Azalea Garden, we added 130 new bushes, which we did not plant, but we just spent several weeks pulling weeds and getting it prepared. And we had a scout group that even helped us do that too. And yeah, it's like a
So
volunteer.
Yeah, so every
Sign
Tuesday,
up.
garden club members meet in teams, rotate, you go up every Tuesday or every other Tuesday to work in the gardens on
So
all
how many
morning.
members do you have in the garden club? How many members are there?
60.
60.
60,
Yeah.
Active members.
The reason I asked you the maintenance question is because I'm the president of the Rock Hill Garden Club. We have a small club that we started sort of recently. Actually, we started it 20 years ago, but it went into a period of rest for 20 years. But we've restarted it recently, and we're actually having this conversation, like, what should we be doing? Should we be calling the guys to come spray and, you know, that sort of thing, or should we be doing some of the work ourselves? And I think that it's been, I'm taking some comfort from the fact that you actually get your hands dirty and
It's a,
that back to the group.
it's a learning experience and a bonding experience.
Well, thank you both. This has been great. Before we finish, I just want to ask, show of hands, are there other people here that are members of the club? Anybody? Can we get a round of applause for these folks that put in all this work to make our city so beautiful? Thank you so much. Thank you both. Again, the book is available for sale back in the lobby. We hope you give it a look. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.